last lecture, I told you about the emergence of Japanese imperialism. Japan's success against China and Russia in the Sino-Japanese War and Russo-Japanese War made Japan a very strong country in East Asia. Japan established her position in Korea after the Russo-Japanese War, and a protectorate of Japan had been established in Korea. Japanese influence in the Korean government increased, and Japan ultimately disbanded the Korean army, but the Koreans protested. These protests were ruthlessly suppressed by the Japanese authorities in Korea. In August 1910, Japan quietly annexed Korea. By 1912, Japan became one of the major imperialist powers with her colonies in Korea and Taiwan and major interest and predominant rights in Manchuria. In 1914, Japan entered the First World War as a British ally. In 1915, when the First World War was going on, Japan placed her 21-point program on China. These demands were very much inimical to the Chinese sovereignty and Chinese territorial integrity. But China had to submit because Japan threatened China to resort to force. Thus, Japan, during the First World War, very much increased her influence within China. Furthermore, Japan signed a treaty with China and took away Shantung from China. Japan entered the Versailles Peace Treaty as one of the 5 major victorious powers, and it was the only non-Western country which was treated with full equality in the Peace Treaty of Versailles. The peacemakers of Versailles recognized Japan's seizure of Shantung of China. By 1920, Japan became the strongest power in the Far East, but by this time, the relationship between Japan and America began to deteriorate. In fact, the problem began with the Japanese immigration problem in the USA. Since 1905, a large number of Japanese laborers had been migrating to USA, and there was a commotion in the internal politics of USA. In about 1915 and 16, there was a tremendous pressure on the US government of their citizens, and they wanted that the US government should take some major steps for putting an end to Japanese immigration. But the Russian Revolution of 1917 again brought the two countries closer. In fact, the specter of communism brought them closer, and ultimately, towards the end of 1917, the Lance-Ishii Treaty had been signed between the USA and Japan. But very soon, this treaty proved to be a burden for the USA. USA wanted to get rid of Japan's aggressive activities in the Far East. And at that time, Great Britain also wanted to get rid of and shake off the responsibility of the Anglo-Japanese alliance, which had been signed in 1902. So, at that crucial juncture of the history of Far East, the United States of America convened a conference in Washington in 1921 for discussing the matters relating to the Far East, and then the Washington Conference had been arranged by the USA. Now I shall deal with the Washington Conference, which took place in November 1921 and continued up to February 1922. Harold Vinnock, an eminent historian on the Far East, have aptly remarked that the modern history of Far East served as the background of the Washington Conference of 1921. 9 powers, USA, Britain, Italy, France, Belgium, Holland, Portugal, Japan and China, these 9 powers attended the Washington Conference. and it took place in 1921. There were three important treaties in the Washington Conference. The first treaty was the Four-Power Pact between USA, Great Britain, France and Japan. Through this treaty, these signatories pledged themselves to respect other insular positions and territorial rights in the Pacific region. They also decided that if any dispute had cropped up, they would settle the dispute not by means of war but through negotiations and discussions. It was the first treaty. Then the Five-Power Pact or Five-Power Treaty had been signed between the USA, Britain, Japan, France and Italy. In this Five-Power Treaty, the signatories wanted to fix the size of the warships in the Pacific region. In fact, the objective of this treaty was restrain Japan's warships and naval bases in the Pacific. It had been decided that the size of the warships would be fixed in the Pacific. Moreover, the ratio of naval power would be as such: USA 5, Britain 5, Japan 3, Italy 1.75, France 1.75. It would be the ratio of the naval power, which meant Japan would be able to retain 60% of the naval power maintained by USA and Britain. Finally, on 6th February 1922, the Nine-Power Treaty, that is, all the participants signed the Nine-Power Treaty, and it was the final treaty of the Washington Conference. Through this treaty, the signatories pledged to maintain territorial integrity, sovereignty and independence of China. But in fact, this was a farce, because still many Western powers had been enjoying extraterritorial rights in China. Moreover, they had a role in determining the tariff structure of China as well. So, at least to the Chinese, the provision of maintenance of territorial integrity and sovereignty of China appeared to be meaningless. Japan accepted the provisions of the Washington Conference very reluctantly. Particularly, the militant nationalists of Japan and the military leaders of Japan refused to accept the provision. They even accused Shidehara, then the foreign minister of Japan, for adopting a weak-kneed Chinese policy, as Japan was forced to cede Shantung to China once again. But finally, they had to accept because USA and Great Britain forced them to accept. E.H. Kerr rightly observed that Japan unwillingly renunciated her claims on the Far East and on China, so there was ample scope for future trouble. The moment the militant nationalists of Japan began to acquire political power, they wanted to violate all the clauses and provisions of the Washington Conference. In fact, Manchurian crisis appeared to be a break, and when the aggressive Japanese foreign policy became manifest with the breakout of the Manchurian crisis in 1931, that is just a decade after the Washington Conference.
Sir, in the Washington Conference, all the nations were being represented by their sovereign heads. But in China, there was no particular head like this, because in this period, China was under warlords. So who was representing China in the Washington Conference?
China was represented by one of the warlords, Yuan Shikai. In fact, it was very much related to Chinese history. China was not a colony like India. As Mao Zedong told, China was in a semi-colonial and semi-feudal status. There were some pockets with special interests of the Western powers and later on of Japan. But there was a sovereign government of China. Up to 1911, there was a Chinese monarchy. In 1911, there was a bourgeois revolution, and for time being Sun Yat-sen became the president, and then came the period of warlords. And the time Washington Conference was going on. At that time there were warlords. It was a paradox. In fact, China had a sovereign status, but all other powers had their pockets and extraterritorial rights in China. So there was a representative whom they fixed, he represented China. China was in a semi-colonial status.
During the Washington Consensus, when the ratio of the warships were being decided, it is found that Japan got the right to have more warships compared to Italy or France. Why is it so? Was it because Japan was more imperial? So far as our imperialist policies were concerned, was Japan more superior to Italy or France? What gave this non-Western country more power than Italy or France?
Japan was the most superpower in the Pacific up to 1920. Even Japan had warships even more than USA and Britain. So one cannot make Japan last. USA and Britain in fact wanted to make Japan third, at least third, that Japan cannot extend her warships and naval base in the Pacific. The USA and UK were afraid of Japan in the Far East for her aggressive policy, but not Italian. There was no question of Italy and France. They had very small, and it was accepted. Even they could not fulfill what it was specified in the Washington Conference. They had very small naval base, Italy and France. I shall deal with the Manchurian crisis of 1931. From the mid-1920s, there was a perceptible change in the internal policy of Japan. Military leaders of Japan were they were demanding a share in the political power as well. But still, there were certain moderate military leaders who did not want to disturb the civil governance of Japan. So up to 1929, 1930, some balance could be maintained in Japan between the army and the civil administration. But the Manchurian crisis of 1931 shattered this balance. In fact, Japan had her vital interests in Manchuria. About 75% of the total foreign investment in Manchuria was of Japanese investment. Moreover, at least 10 lakhs of Japanese people began to reside in Manchuria since long. The Treaty of Portsmouth, which had been concluded after the Russo-Japanese War, allowed Japan to station at least 15,000 troops in Manchuria for the protection of South Manchurian railways in Japan, and the headquarters of the Japanese army was situated in Mukden, the capital of Manchuria. These military leaders who were stationed in Manchuria, they had very little link and little relationship with the mainstream Japanese government. They decided to invade Manchuria at any cost. On September 1931, there was a bomb blast in the South Manchurian railways. Japan took it as a pretext and accused the Chinese authorities for this bomb blast. Japan immediately unleashed a large-scale war against Manchuria, and in no time Mukden had been captured by the Japanese army. Within a few days, all the cities situated in the north of Manchuria, all these were Chinese cities, all those cities had been annexed by Japan. By 4th January 1932, Japan's victory over Manchuria was complete. Japan then dislodged. In Japan means the army officers of Japan dislodged the provincial government of China in Manchuria and set up a puppet Republic of Manchukuo towards the end of 1931 and in early 1932. China had no other alternative but to complain to the League of Nations. China complained to the League of Nations for this arbitrary intervention of the Japanese authorities in Manchuria. The League of Nations immediately set up the Lytton Commission for a thorough inquiry of the incidents in Manchuria. The Lytton Commission began its work in Manchuria from May 1932. In September 1932, the Lytton Commission submitted its report to the League of Nations. The Lytton Commission accused Japan of aggressive designs in the Far East. It also dismissed Japan's pretexts and excuses for her attack on Manchuria. The establishment of Manchukuo had become a fiction according to League of Nations, and League of Nations claimed that it was nothing but a fictitious story that a Manchukuo republic had been set up by Japan there. Further, the League of Nations recommended that an autonomous government in Manchuria should be established after a thorough negotiation between China and Japan. The report of the Lytton Commission was placed before the General Assembly of the League of Nations in February 1933. The General Assembly accepted the report of the Lytton Commission and accused Japan. Immediately, the Japanese delegation left the meeting hall. Within 1 month, that is in March 1933, Japan made her official announcement of quitting the League of Nations. In fact, League of Nations looked helpless in the wake of Japanese aggressive attitude. League of Nations could not take any step against the aggressive attitude of Japan. And you know, there is an interesting book of A.J.P. Taylor, The Origins of the Second World War. Taylor wrote, "The Manchurian incident was treated as a milestone on the road to war, the first decisive betrayal of the League of Nations." According to H. Carr, in his International Relations Between the Two World Wars, Carr observed, "The Japanese conquest of Manchuria was one of the most important landmarks in the history of the world since the First World War." Why did Japan invade Manchuria? In fact, by that time, the economic depression began. Like many other countries, Japan was very badly affected by the worldwide depression of the late 1920s and early 1930s. Many of the Japanese statesmen, and particularly Japanese capitalists and military leaders of Japan, began to believe the world trading system was gradually breaking down. The age of open competition for achieving global market was probably coming to an end. So Japan should conquer new territories in search of new markets, and Manchuria had been the first step Japan's designs. Japan thought that conquering countries one after another, Japan could get new markets. Japan's economy would be consolidated, unemployment problem would be solved, productivity would be increased, and by this means Japan could give away with social tensions within its country. In fact, the Manchurian crisis appeared to be a landmark not only in the Japan's foreign policy. It is true Japanese expansionism entered a new phase, but in the domestic policy of Japan also there was a serious change with this Manchurian crisis. In May 1933, the Japanese Prime Minister Inukai, the 76-year-old man and at the same time president of the Seijukai political party of Japan, was brutally assassinated by a group of naval officers in Japan. This incident marked the end of parliamentary rule in Imperial Japan. Japan's imperialism and army rule began to reach a new high after the Manchurian crisis.
Apart from not recognizing the Manchukuo government set up by the Japanese military leaders, was Japan asked to pay some compensation to Manchuria? And did this demand force Japan to quit the League of Nations?
No. League of Nations in fact did nothing. League of Nations just accepted the report of the Lytton Commission. the leaders of the League of Nations, particularly those leaders of Britain and France, they did not even ask Japan that they would take any economic measures, economic sanction against Japan. Nothing was discussed. Before that, the Japanese delegation left the meeting hall, showing arrogance and obstinacy. The League of Nations failed to take any steps. And then when Japan realized that League was nothing but a helpless organization and could do nothing, Japan announced a decision to quit the League. League did not take the decision. All the decisions regarding Manchukuo, regarding a new government, regarding other things, these were the recommendations of the Lytton Commission. The League just accepted the Lytton Commission, but could not inform Japan anything. Before that, Japanese delegation left the hall, and they put an end to the entire discussion. Only 2 countries opposed the decision. There were 44 countries present in the meeting of the General Assembly. 42 countries thought that the Lytton Commission report should be accepted and necessary steps should be taken against Japan. 2 countries opposed, Japan herself and Siam, presently Thailand, because that country was very much dependent on the Japanese military leaders at that time. These 2 countries only opposed. The result was 42 to 2, and accepted by Lytton Commission report was accepted by 42 to 2 votes in the General Assembly of the League of Nations. League of Nations did nothing. A.J.P. Taylor says that main responsibility for the Second World War and for troublemaking was the League leaders. If they could check Japan in 1931 in Manchuria, the Second World War probably could have been avoided. Taylor's view is that it is then blame Hitler, then blame Chamberlain, Daladier and others. First blame the League of Nations, which League of Nations did in 1931.
Japan's conquest over Manchuria came at a time when the whole of the Western countries and more of the capitalist countries and even Japan, they were going through this economic slump. So given this fact, did the Japanese industrialists support the Japan's conquest over Manchuria?
Yes. In fact, it is a problem of Japan's internal history, not of external history, but very much related with the internal history. By the end of the 1920s and early 1930s, a group emerged in Japan known as the Zaibatsu group. There were 5 big industrial houses, and Mitsui, Mitsubishi, Sumitomo, all these 5 groups formed the Zaibatsu group. The Zaibatsu group was the source of money of these military leaders. They encouraged the military leaders because they thought that by capturing new markets, their goods could be sold. They could get raw material from the fertile areas like enriched areas like Manchuria and other places. They could not believe on the civil government. They thought that the civil governance in Japan, civil administration in Japan was too gentle to make any good for them, to give any good to them. They could not. So at first there was a tacit deal, but from 1934-35 onwards, I don't know who will teach you the internal history of Japan of this period when political parties were going down and military rule was coming very fastly. They were absolutely supported by this Zaibatsu group, and later they had been called the Shinko Zaibatsu in Japan, who financed everything for the military. The state did not give them salary. They wanted to give army the salary. It became a very interesting feature of Japan, the conflict between civil governance and military rule, army rule. And army rule was patronized by financially and by in every way was patronized by the by the Japanese industrial groups, called Zaibatsu. Before the First World War, Japan emerged as a major imperial power with her interests in Korea, Taiwan, and predominant rights in Manchuria. Japan entered the First World War as a British ally without playing any military role, but playing a minimal military role. Japan gained much from the First World War, all the German occupations in the Far East and Shantung of China. By 1920, Japan became a major power in the Far East. United States of America became interested to check the ever-increasing power of Japan, and hence the Washington Conference had been convened. Washington Conference clipped Japan's wings to some extent, and Japan's powers had been curtailed in the Far East and in the Pacific. After 10 years of the Washington Conference, Japanese imperialism rose to a new high when the Japanese military authorities attacked Manchuria and the Manchurian crisis took place. The League of Nations failed to take any steps against Japan, and ultimately, with the Manchurian crisis, Japanese imperialism entered into a new phase, and Japan's expansionism in the East Asia took a more aggressive design.